welcome back to 3rd Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and this is something that I completely forgot was in my backlog, to be honest, so this is going to be another one which I've managed to unearth from way back in autumn of last year. So I'm not sure of the relevancy of it anymore, but this is a clan war battle, so this should be rather interesting from that perspective. It's going to be a complete mishmash of factions, of course. Lore definitely goes out the window when it comes to battles such as this, but this is on the grassy plain. This is on the currently publicly available version of it as well, so it's not on the new patch. Last time, of course, we saw the grassy plain, it was on the new patch, showcasing some new factions, and this is almost certainly going to be the last time that we see the grassy plain in action with the current meta of the game. And to be fair, very often when we have seen this current version of the game recently, it hasn't been on a battlefield such as this. Siege battles are far more common on my channel because that is what people prefer to see, but the actual meta of the game when it comes to a setup like this is a little bit different, so it is going to be interesting to see how differently things do end up working out as a result of that. But of course, this is going to be the last time that we see the grassy plain on this version of the game, and I do believe that by this point I will also be starting to churn out some preview content for the new patch, in addition to the one battle on the grassy plain that we have certainly already seen at this point, as I've already recorded that one. But yes, a 4v4 between the KOS faction and the Fear faction. As I mentioned as well, there's no such lore restrictions for the factions that could be picked, and this is just going to be a little bit of fun. Like a pitch battle is something that we scarcely see in this version of Reforged at this point, so it'll be good to see something like this on the channel, and it's a relatively small battle as well, a little bit of a palate cleanser before we inevitably move into more siege battles, as I do believe I will be receiving some siege battle scenarios from a certain someone fairly soon, at least from my perspective. So, Aranor, who is the player who we are going to be viewing this battle from the perspective of, is going to be playing as Isengard, a very well-rounded faction. If you don't know if you're going completely blind into any sort of battle situation, Isengard are well-rounded enough to be able to be useful in a variety of situations. Now, the Uruk-hai archers really are just going to be here to make up the numbers. The stakes do mean that you're going to be revealed in terms of your setup in the deployment phase. The opponents can see, after all, where the stakes get deployed before your units pop into view. The Uruk-hai archers, though, I would imagine with a battle as short as this, and many pitch battles like this are slightly shorter, running out of ammunition is less of a concern, and longer skirmishing is also less of a concern, I would suggest. So the Uruk-hai archers really just here to make sure that Isengard can't be bullied at long range, but ultimately just that is really their only focus. Now, the Uruk-hai crossbows are another interesting thing because they do allow you to focus down individual units and kill them off pretty quickly, though unlike in a siege battle where you're going to have plenty of time to use your full ammo supply, that may very well not end up being the case in a pitch battle. Only one unit of Uruk-hai crossbows as well. They can be pretty good on an open field battle as well at zoning out enemy cavalry, so that is something else worth bearing in mind as the battle goes along. We have the Shiltrom formation with the Dunlending clansmen in here, a useful unit actually on an open field because of that heightened anti-cavalry bonus they have. Among all of the really lowly units of spears from the various evil factions, the Dunlending clansmen are probably the best. I don't know if Isengard are actually maintaining their ownership of this unit in the next patch, with Dunland being made much more their own thing. It's possible there will still be crossover between the two factions, but the Uruk-hai pikemen are in and amongst them as well. You know, you will very, very rarely see Isengard go without one of their three central pillars, the crossbows, the infantry and the pikemen. And the pikemen mean that from a straight up front point of view, it's going to be difficult to simply bowl Isengard over. Very few factions are going to be able to do that, especially with the more limited time you often have access to in a pitch battle like this. The Lurtz hunting pack as well. Body-piercing projectiles are generally less useful on the open field, though they can still find their place if you can maneuver the enemy into a situation where you can get just a few volleys right down the line. That can be a huge difference maker, especially for a faction who's as domineering in that theatre of war with their pikes as Isengard already are. The Lurtz hunting pack are also a little bit different from many other rangers in the sense they're multiple HP and have decent melee stats as well, but don't expect them to do the kind of heavy lifting that some of their really strong infantry units can do. Uruk-hai archers, then back here we do have some Uruk-hai infantry with the Uruk-hai pikes, of course, a very dependable unit of sword and board. And then we also have the Trolls of the White Hand as well, which on an open field battle like this, again with the faster pace of them, Trolls of the White Hand could be really, really useful for dealing with the opposition. I believe Umbar are the ones that they're directly opposite. No, it's Angmar, so I mean, again, heavy infantry faction nonetheless. so the Trolls of the White Hand could be very, very useful for doing a lot of damage very quickly to their opposite numbers. Armour piercing is also going to be useful in that regard. Uruk-hai Berserkers, again, with how fast these battles are in these pitch battles, I do think that Uruk-hai Berserkers actually find themselves arguably more at home in this kind of battle than anything else, because they do tend to fizzle out in a siege, whereas in this kind of situation they can end up being the difference makers. The Nazkai, of course, stronger all round, and once again the armour piercing always going to be useful. Most factions are going to find a place for armour piercing to be useful. Warg Riders and Warg Skirmishers, I think, in terms of anti-cavalry capabilities, we've seen very recently in the melee cavalry knockout tourney that Angmar can very much go toe-to-toe with Isengard, but in real battle situations like this, they're going to be very, very close to one another in terms of how effective they are, and how you use these units is going to be far more important than their individual effectiveness. But Warg Riders are one example of a cavalry unit which is actually pretty good in this version of the game because of that second hit point they have. Umbar, played by the Camping Panda, is going to be the nearest ally to Isengard. We have the Warlords of Umbar and the Alcarondas Faithful, so the Melee Knights and the Lance Knights. Not too surprising to see these two units either, purely because multiple HP cavalry is the way to go in this version of the game, even on more open maps like this. Single HP cavalry can very often be far too fragile. Corsair Infantry is a place for Umbar to effectively save money. They can launch a few volleys downrange and then get into melee without being completely defenceless, and given how fast paced these battles tend to be, that is probably the way to go. Balaguer archers are going to be better at long range with more ammunition, though I do think stats wise the Corsair Infantry do have a few advantages, though without the armour upgrade as they are, it's probably relatively close. We'll see. Umbar, though, it's very rare that if you play as Umbar, your opposite number will try and skirmish with you over a longer period of time, because that is an area where Umbar are very strong. Balaguer Footmen and Balaguer Pikemen represent a fairly cost-effective front line, going to be fairly resilient, though not the best at dealing damage. A unit which is going to be pretty good at dealing damage, though, the Alcarondas Legion, much like the Uruk-hai Infantry, though to a slightly greater extent, they're going to be very solid combatants on a front line, keeping themselves alive for a decent period of time and doing a fair amount of damage into the deal as well. Corsair Blackguards, another good choice of unit in a fast-paced battle like this, because they can use their javelins and then they're pretty decent in melee as well, and that is a real theme of things, and it's one reason why the blue team here, Team KOS, may be onto a winner. More Corsair Blackguards, but it was a lot of money to dump into those two cavalry units, so they're hoping to win the mobility game for sure. Then we have Dawn, who's playing as Lothlorien. Lothlorien's weaknesses when it comes to a skirmish fight are less pronounced, I think, in this kind of battle, given the fact that the skirmish fight is likely to be over and done with fairly quickly, so the extra damage from the March Wardens of the Wood are probably going to be useful here. But conversely, the poison projectiles, while they could be useful, are maybe going to be less easy to use as they can be in a siege, where you can really start to pile the pressure on to attacking forces. Blades of the Wood, again, I think these lighter infantry units, they're efficient, and as long as they don't have to wade through a hailstorm of arrows, then they will be effective on the front line, especially backed up by some of the heavier Lorien units, though Lothlorien, as with many elven factions, their smaller armies can be even more of a problem on an open field like this because they're more easily outmaneuvered. But we'll see. Loreland Archers, Loreland Axemen as well, so they're going to be very capable of dealing incredible amounts of damage to whomever they face. We've got the Kindred of Celeborn with the armour upgrades in here as well, so as soon as their split shots are out, or if they just get engaged in melee, they're very capable of defending themselves. Dual wielders in melee to add that extra melee defense on top of the armour upgrades they have as well. Very tough to kill indeed. More javelins in the Woodland Protectors, maybe a little bit less of a threat in melee as the Corsair Blackguards are, but still. And then at the back some Loreland Warriors as well, so some armour piercing will certainly not go amiss. As we've already mentioned, armour piercing, very, very rare that it's actually not useful. Only a few of the elven factions really render it relatively inert. And finally we have Hertumihai, who's playing as Cardolan, so some Minhiriath men-at-arms backed up by the Greenway Garrison footmen, moving very quickly to occupy a position with Lorien. So the blue team look to be consolidating themselves in the middle, which is risky actually in a pitch battle, more risky than you would expect, but I think Cardolan's numbers can really mesh quite well with Lothlorien over on this side, especially given the pikes that Cardolan bring to the table as well, plenty of them too. I've already mentioned crossbows. Not too surprising to see Cardolan bring even more than Isengard, actually, because the Minhiriath sharpshooters can be useful in melee as well. And it does also make the potential mobility advantage, which the blue team seem to be willing to surrender to the red team, less of a problem if crossbows can keep cavalry at arm's length. Greenway Garrison spearmen are very weak when it comes to dealing damage, but they can at least stand and fight and take a decent amount of range damage while they can. Greenway Garrison archers, as I mentioned, cheaper archers like this on a relatively fast battle tend to be less effective, but it's a fair amount of volume to add to the quality of the elven projectiles we've already seen. More Greenway Garrison spearmen. We have the very nasty Manatar Roman gatekeepers with the armour upgrade as well. The Wardens of Tyr and Gorthard are over on this side too, and again a fairly hefty cavalry presence with the Royal Courthouse, the Rondor, the Dunedain Commanders and the Tharbad Riders. Plenty of damage potential here. Cardolan though, not particularly good if they get bogged down in melee. All of their cavalry is lance cavalry with no bonuses at fighting other mounted units, so we'll see if that proves to be a significant deal. Now then, we have the red team, the Fear, played by, well, Fear clan with Darthy Darth playing as Imladris, so more elven presence over on this side of the field. Certainly they'll have the quality advantage over Cardolan, but will the numbers be a bit of a problem? Looks like, again, more of a cavalry-focused presence with the Riders of the Broinen with the armour upgrade, the extremely expensive but very, very strong Gwythi Rockdor. This is the kind of unit which Cardolan can't really deal with too easily unless they mob it with all their cavalry at once. Swords of Rivendell with the armour upgrade will be pretty effective against most things other than the Cardolan pikes, and the very best Cardolan infantry will still manage to defeat them, but stuff like the Minhiriath going to trade very poorly with them unless they can whittle them down at range a decent amount before they get into melee. The Gwythi Myrdain with that armour piercing, of course, going to be useful for dealing with most of the high tier units from all of the opposing factions, actually, even Lothlorien to a certain extent. Spears of Rivendell in here as well to help act as an anchor, though it is looking like they're trying to go for a fairly aggressive approach here, with most of the entry level units being front and centre, with lots of Swords of Rivendell, lots of Spears of Rivendell. They're going to move forward aggressively, which they will need to, because Cardolan hoping to go to the relative safety of their Lorien allies. This cavalry, though, is going to be the key to Imladris' success. Eldarin Way Lance is another unit of single HP cavalry, though, again, much like the Cardolan Lancers we've seen, are still damaging, but I don't know, it's a risky army this from Imladris. Either Cardolan will get enveloped before they can get to their support and destroyed quickly, or very much the opposite will happen and Imladris will bounce off a prepared defence. We'll see. Then we have Church 762, got some Arthedain pikemen, and got some Arthedain men-at-arms as well, acting in kind of a similar way to the Imladris frontline, so maybe a unified approach being adopted by the Fear clan here, which is good to see. It does mean that some sort of plan is in place. Dismounted Knights of Anumnus, much like the Gwythi Myrdain from Imladris, acting as a real unit of quality at the heart of this effort. Got some Anumnus Gate Guards in there as well, so the higher tier pikes, some Dunedain Commanders, or Dunedain Peacekeepers I should say, and some Wardens of the North, looking like on foot at the very least. Arthedain have got a little bit more quality. They've gone for less mounted units, but I think that that's fine. In fact, I think it's probably the wise thing to do. Dunedain Mounted Company are a unit of basic melee cav. They do have a trebuchet, which, I don't know, I mean, as they move forward, it really depends on whether or not some of the blue team cavalry can slip the net and get into the trebuchet crew, because it's undoubtedly going to be completely undefended unless the Dunedain Mounted Company stay back here. And there is also the small matter of the Royal Court of House Armlaith as well. Probably not the budget to go for the Knights of Anumnus, but still, they're heavy enough and bulky enough that the lack of an anti-cavalry bonus isn't really the end of the world, given the Imladris presence on the field right next to them. Then we have Black Templar, who's playing as Harad. So Harad are actually very well set up to be very aggressive, and indeed they can't afford to sit back too much, given their lighter nature. We've got some Haradrim Spearmen here on the flank. We also have some Southron archers who are opening up already. Obviously both factions very much in view of one another with how the deployment zones on the grassy plain are, but as I've already mentioned, Southron archers not going to be great in a skirmish fight, especially not against their opposite numbers in Umbar, but that isn't going to be the plan, I think, here for the red team, if they do intend to be very aggressive. And once again, we're seeing a very similar thing where there's infantry, in this case the very, very scary trollmen, which very recently we've seen be very decisive, backed up by the Muhard beast tamers, so an anchor unit and a unit intended to do more damage. I do think Harad actually match up relatively well to Umbar. Umbar definitely have a quality advantage, but the armour piercing and savagery of the Haradrim can very often lead them to their success, and this is also another faction where armor piercing isn't going to be too useful against you if you play as Harad. Dismounted Serpent Guard without the armor upgrade, but that's not too important. Their presence on the front line is still very much appreciated, and only really the best of the Umbar forces that we've seen can actually beat them in the Alcarondas Legion, so there we go. Champions of Nafrat are very, very scary, by far and away the best infantry unit in this section of the field so far. Uhard Beast Hunters offering some javelin support. The Demons of the Desert are an interesting choice, in much the same way as Rangers. If you can get them to shoot down a front line, they can be exceptionally effective, but we've seen in sieges that they're fairly difficult to use, and that is even more so the case in a pitched battle like this. Interesting to see as well, there's more Haradrim Spearmen, but more of a cavalry presence as well. The Muhard Beast Masters, Javelin Cavalry, so it's going to be a bit of a back and forth between the Wargs and the heavily armoured Knights and all of that sort of thing. Whoever wins the cavalry fight, it's going to be a fairly bruising encounter for whoever does, but it's still going to be an exceptionally useful victory for whoever can pull that off. All Beastmasters there. We've got some Southron Lancers also. Again, I'm not a huge fan of really entry-level Lance cavalry like this. They don't do enough damage off the charge, they die off very quickly, and ultimately they cost as much as a half-decent unit of mid-tier infantry. So, I don't know, we'll see. Maybe it can be made to work. And last but not least, we have Leech, who's playing as Angmar. Angmar, pretty much the ultimate aggressive faction, so it's never really going to be a surprise when Angmar come at you at full force. Angmar Marauders, lots of Angmar Marauders as well, so trying to go for a bit of a numbers advantage, and considering Isengard can field a fairly large army themselves, trying to have the advantage on foot in terms of numbers as well as with quality is not the worst thing that Angmar can do in this situation. They do have the Witchram Inquisitors, the recent victors of the Melee Cavalry Knockout tourney, the last such tourney that we will be doing in this version of the game. I don't know, I mean, considering the amount of Wargs that are opposite them, they definitely have the quality advantage, but 2 units of Warg Riders, 1 unit of Warg Skirmishers, they're going to need some help from the Haradrim, I think, and considering Umbar's presence as well, cavalry could well be the reason why the blue team win this side, but we'll see. Guardians of Kharndoom in combination with the Witchram Pikemen. Once again, we're seeing a unit of standard infantry backed up by an anchor unit of polearms, and undoubtedly they will try and swamp forward, establish themselves with the polearms, and then slowly bleed the enemy out with their aggression. And then a final wave coming in as well with the Scourge Raiders offering their support, the throwing projectiles that they will be utilising. Definitely the sort of thing which could end up being very, very key in this battle. The Hammer Guard, another very scary unit of melee infantry. Certainly in terms of infantry strength, the red team have got the edge here. Over here at the very least. I think Imladris' army is maybe the one exception to that particular rule, but all of the others I think have invested enough in their quality to the point where if it does come down to just a pure slog, the red team should win, but they also have maybe a little bit less versatility than the blue team. Blackwatch Legion are an interesting choice, though. They can definitely bulldoze their way through the Isengard pike line, which is maybe the saving grace of Isengard compared to their allies. They have enough pikes and quality of pikes to the point where even if it does come down to a melee slog, they can last for a little bit longer. And the Witchram Blackguard as well, so a lot of high quality units of Angmar in behind a very functional force of infantry. The only ranged units as well are throwing axes, so there is only one direction Angmar can move in, and it is forwards until they either secure victory or perish. But yes, I think, without further ado, let's get the show on the road. So I do feel as though we're going to be making very liberal use of half speed indeed, though to start with at the very least, it's going to be interesting to see what the opening moves from both sides are. Now the Trebuchet coming in here, and actually the Trebuchet, even with how scattered they are, going up against the Elves, any hits that you get against the Elves are going to be of fairly decent quality, so the Trebuchet is probably at its very best facing off against Lothlorien. The Elven contingent, as the blue team immediately starts to contract around one another. We will go down to half speed already though, because it's going to be the cavalry, and overall a bit of a difference from a siege battle is, rather ironically, despite the scale of many siege battles, it's actually the micro elements of the battle, like what units are being committed exactly where, which can end up making a big difference, whereas in a pitched battle like this, it's the whole picture. So the mini-map up in the top corner is going to be very, very important when it comes to trying to figure out where exactly the momentum in the battle is going. Darth doing exactly the right thing there by aborting that charge with the Elrond Lancers there, because while he would have got a decent charge into the men-at-arms, he would have ended up losing most of that unit of cavalry on the ends of those Cardolan pikes. And the aggression begins, flanked by the cavalry as it is from the red team. I will be interested to see how the Arthedain front line gets on against the Lothlorien elves initially. I would imagine as soon as those Arthedainian pikes come forward, the shortcomings or relative shortcomings of stuff like the Arthedain men-at-arms will be made up for. But we'll see. The dismounted Knights of Anumnus are still there as well, of course, and still the Trebuchet getting 2 decent hits there on 2 very different units. I will say the Dunedain Peacekeepers should find themselves right at home against the lighter Lothlorien units. The extra base damage on those axes very good, and of course the Dunedain are not found quite as wanting in terms of overall quality as regular humans are when facing off against the elves. Meanwhile, the Harad are moving forward. You would worry as well for the Balagai units here, especially with the Trollmen being the ones to come forward as the shock troops first and foremost. They're going to be reliant a little bit more on the support of their cavalry and their pikes and the like. As I did mention in the composition phase, if it does come down to sheer brute force of infantry, I do like the way that the red team are set up more, but they do have less tactical flexibility, like I also said. There's a little bit of, it's a little bit all over the place over here. There's a few dead Haradrim riders, but one thing that you would certainly say here is they're not exactly in a set position just yet. They should get there before Angmar arrive, but they need to be a little bit careful about this, I think, Isengard and Umbar. One thing that I have noted before, it's been a while since I've done a series of pitch battles, but very often, if you do try to adopt a very defensive posture like the blue team clearly are and sort of bend in on yourselves, you surrender the initiative really to the opposition team, and that can end up biting you more often than not. Our beast tamers need to be a little bit careful though as well. It's very easy to lose track of individual units in a situation like this though, where the battle is very fast and frenetic, so you have to bear that in mind. It's very different from a siege battle where you're viewing one position that you're responsible for over a long period of time, and missing details is much less understandable, but in this kind of situation things are very, very different indeed. Lorien Axemen fighting the good fight on the front line, as was mentioned, very similar in many ways actually to the Dunedain Peacekeepers, but it will be the pikes for Arthedain that end up doing most of the heavy lifting here, you would assume, and indeed Lothlorien a little bit on the back foot some ways, but Arthedain also a little bit all over the place. I do feel as though aggression is the way the red team clearly wants to set out their stall here, but they need to be a bit careful, and it needs to be measured aggression. If pikes can't get themselves into a good position, then they're going to be in real trouble. Over here you can see that it is the Cardolan pikes that are allowing them to fight Imladris basically to a standstill. It's not Imladris at their most high quality. There's also Tharbad Warhammers in there, but also the cavalry getting in and amongst things here. And the fact that it is actually the Cardolan cavalry that appear to be landing the more telling blows is a real problem, I think, actually, for Imladris. They need to be winning that cav fight with how much they've invested into it. They've got those horse archers in addition to the more expensive high-end cavalry units they have access to. Cardolan have invested a fair amount themselves, but not as much. And Imladris, I think they do need to get some hammer and anvil strikes on that Cardolan front line. Hertumahai will be quite pleased with how this has gone initially, at the very least. The god Helene getting far out wide, the Royal Court of House Thorondor managing to get a charge into them, partially intercepted by the Riders of the Groin in there, but that's the sort of thing we were mentioning with the Rangers earlier on. Didn't notice the god Helene actually in the composition phase. The Silver Thorns are not going to be as effective at firing into a front line that's set, so they will merely be very damaging archers, more so than actually utilising the unique aspects of that projectile. Meanwhile, way over here, Isengard now facing off against Angmar, and they were able to get themselves set into a good formation before Angmar arrived. Things were looking a little bit dicey for a second there. You can also see that the large two-handed hook blades of the Nazkai are also in and amongst here, so Angmar Marauders are certainly not going to be the answer to that. And the more numerous nature of the Isengard cavalry could also prove to be a real problem here. Angmar Marauders, Snaga Stalkers revealing themselves as well. Practically free for a single unit of them, so you may as well bring them in most situations, but I don't think they're going to last very long. Although, stakes nearby? One of those Warg Riders went flying, as if he ran through stakes. Skirmishers, Warg Riders, Warg Skirmishers with those javelins could kite the Inquisitors around a lot, but frankly, as long as the Wargs are not hammer and anvil striking Angmar on the front line, they should be fairly happy with that. Pike to pike here as well. The Witch-Round Pikemen and the Uruk-hai Pikemen very, very similar to one another in terms of the level of damage they're capable of doing. The main difference really is a macro one. You can bring more Uruk-hai Pikemen than you can Witch-Round Pikemen. There you can also see the throwing axes going in behind. Going after the wrong target, I think, in the Uruk-hai archers. They're not really the main threat. If you can do enough damage to the Isengard front line, you will end up busting through the lines, like Harad have actually been able to do here. You can see the situation is pretty bleak for Umbar, actually. The champions of Nafarat, the Trollman in general. Unsurprisingly, I think, given the two compositions, Umbar trying to be a little bit more about the efficiency of their infantry units and maybe relying a little bit more on their supporting tools, which is fair enough, but when you're going up against someone like Harad, who you know is going to bring a very robust attacking force to the table with all of that armor piercing, I don't know whether this was necessarily the best idea from the Camping Panda. You can see that we did see the Corsair Crossmen and the Corsair, or Castamir's Rangers I should say, also revealing themselves from being hidden earlier on. But that's a lot of supporting units, crossbows, rangers, javelin man. Not enough up front pressure, at least in the middle, and yeah, in fact you can see that Umbar are really in trouble, which is going to become Isengard's problem soon enough as well. You can see that Isengard are sending over more units now, including the trolls of the White Hand, to try and staunch the bleeding. And that will work to a certain extent. Stuff like the Trollmen's still going to be very effective against the trolls, to be fair, but they've managed to avoid encountering them. As long as they can buy themselves a little bit more time, and also all of the Isengard supporting units, like the archers and their own crossbows and their own rangers, should be able to do a decent amount of damage. Angmar need to be continuing the pressure themselves, however. This will all be for naught if Angmar end up losing anyway. The red team, Blackwatch Legion, piling through the Isengard lines. So we head back over to here, looking like the quality of Imladris is trying to impress itself. You can actually see where the pikes aren't, is where Cardolan are really starting to struggle, and where their notoriously low morale is starting to kick in. Scarcely will you see a bigger difference in terms of base morale, I suppose, given how brave the elves tend to be in the face of danger. The God Halim still firing in, and this is a little bit of a problem. This is what I was worried about from a blue team perspective. I mean, the crossbows are the kind of unit which have effectively made much of the cavalry over here be a little bit more of a footnote than anything else. You can see that they are actually doing a fairly decent job of charging in where they can, and morale is starting to suffer here a little bit, so this could be another victory for the red team ultimately. Harad with a noticeable one, and if Imladris can do the same, then that's going to be a little bit of a problem here in the middle between Lothlorien and Arthedain. Arthedain not able to impress themselves quite so much on the elves here. It is interesting to note actually the two Arnorian petty kingdoms with a little bit more of a focus around pikes to try and make up for the quality difference between themselves and the two heavier elven factions, but so far you'd have to say it's actually been the upfront quality of the elves that has proven to be more of a factor here, and the faster nature of pitched battles and the easier time you have of outmaneuvering pikes than you do in siege battles has also proven to be very, very important. Dunedain Rangers and Troll Slayers as well, and you have to say that a lot of these really high-end supporting projectile units have not actually lived up to their billing. The God Halim may be the biggest exception to that rule so far, because the Wardens of the North clearly have not impacted this fight in the way they would have wanted to. Troll Slayers can be so devastating as well, and now the morale of Arthedain is also starting to falter, so Lothlorien could pick up a noticeable victory for the blue team here and then turn around to face their elven brethren. The margins of victory here are going to be absolutely vital. Harad's win has proven to be a significant one as well, I feel, because this means Isengard, their position is now fairly scattered. Their ranged units are pretty far back, getting hunted down all the while by chasing units. Umbar do still have a few units left available to them, a few missiles that could still be very, very useful, and it's not as if Harad have come out of that blitzkrieg of Umbar completely unscathed, so Angmar is still going to have to take the lead in trying to finish Isengard off. And I don't think they're going to be able to do that, because based on the look of this front line, well, I don't know, it's still fairly even. The The mass pushing of the Blackwatch Legion has helped matters somewhat. The Warg's going to be important here. That's one thing I would say about this battle so far, is there have been a few decent charges, but the cavalry has not been as domineering as the players who brought a lot of cavalry would have wanted it to be, at least not in the way that was intended, I think. Imladris have maybe had the best time with their own cavalry, but that was in spite of all of those crossbow bolts that Cardolan were sending their way. Still the Scourge Raiders, still a few units far back, including some Snaga archers, so Angmar still have a little bit more left to give. Unlending clansmen going around the flank as well. So far, Isengard are sort of feasting upon all of these lowly units that Angmar have back here, but I really think Isengard, instead of going after them, should probably be focusing more of their attention on the Angmarim front line, as we see it here. So far, Isengard are doing a pretty decent job, actually, of holding on, but the lines have been breached. The Blackwatch Legion are in behind them, Isengard having to siphon off important units like the Berserkers, who would be so useful for turning the tide against Angmar on the front line, but they're having to try and deal with the remnants of the Haradrim that were victorious against the Umbar front line. Though it has to be said, Harad very much on their last legs as well. The most they can do at this point is continue to be a bit of a thorn in Isengard's side and hope that Angmar can outlast their Uruk-hai, not brethren so much. What about over here? This is a fairly significant victory for Lothlorien as well, so there has been a decent amount of back and forth here. It has, for the most part, been those 4 1v1s that you would expect with a little bit of crossover. And then that, of course, extrapolates outwards when Harad had their win. Woodland Protectors are there. Cardolan's still alive. What is the status of this fight over here? That, well, looks like actually, in spite of all of the routing that was being incurred, I think the crossbow support has borne fruit, and in the end, Imladris, largely a functional force, and it's no surprise really that the surviving part of the Cardolan line is the bit with the Tharbad Warhammers in it, and the bit where the pikes were at their most dense. There's also the small matter of the Umbar cavalry. I mean, Umbar effectively surrendered that engagement to Harad in melee in order to bring cavalry of this quality. So now they are over here giving their ally a helping hand, and if Cardolan can win, if Lothlorien can win, and even if Isengard just make sure it's only a Pyrrhic victory for Angmar on the other side, the blue team are well on their way, I think. Still anyone's guess though. Minhiriath sharpshooters won't enjoy being up against the basic elven units too much. Their armour piercing won't be terribly useful. The God Hellium are still here as well, so I think regardless of where you look, as is very often the way in a pitched battle like this, it's going to be Pyrrhic victories all round for those that can manage to achieve them. It may actually be Lothlorien who've had the best time of it. I think a large part of that is them bringing a good amount of regular skirmish support and having, you know, the elven quality on the front has been significant as well. The pike coverage for Arthedain, maybe not what the red team would have hoped it to be. Blackwatch Legion getting pinned back by javelins and archers. There goes a general. That may have been the Harad general actually, because the champions of Nafrat were around here. Still the Southron archers firing away. Warg skirmishers. Obviously this is where things get a little bit stretched out and it's kind of impossible to keep track of absolutely everything that's happening on the battlefield. But taking good trades at this point can be the difference maker. The quality is still here for Angmar, but the positioning is not, and they've managed to effectively box Angmar in, which round pikemen starting to close the jaws. Uruk-hai pikemen, I should say. Nazkai is still healthy as well, which is a concern. They've been involved on the front line for quite a while. It's a sign that none of the true heavy hitters of Angmar have really been doing a great deal of anything. And Angmar, of course, don't tend to have units that are that damaging. They're just very aggressive and their units are difficult to kill. I'm saying I'm a little bit surprised not to see the Barrow-wights. In this sort of situation, the Barrow-wights can be a major annoyance to try and get rid of, both in sieges and in pitch battles. But I think Isengard are going to be fine against Angmar, actually, and in the end, Harad are not going to have enough to carry the day all on their own. Still a few Umbar units. I mean, you would definitely have to say that Harad won the fight overall in the middle. Umbar may still be standing, but they're significantly more punch-drunk than they were at the start of the day as a result of that. Split-shot projectiles coming in, going after the Gwathi Myrdain, who are actually in the middle of nowhere, at least partially, and also being held at arm's length by the Warns of Tir Gorthad. There goes the Imladris general at the hands of those macemen. More and more it is looking like KOS are going to be the ones to go on to win this particular battle. It's been, as with most fast and frenetic pitch battles, any number of things could have changed most of the engagements on the battle, but it's all about how well you can respond to things quickly and how good your initial plan is, and actually being maybe a little bit more reserved on this occasion has actually paid off for the blue team. Off go the Warlords of Umbar, and you have to say the Umbar cavalry coming over here to support Cardolan has been important, because without that cavalry support, without the good charge damage that they're capable of doing, Imladris may very well have gone on to win this side. I don't know whether that would have been the be-all and end-all, whether that would have had a huge bearing on the outcome of the overall battle. 54 Corsair infantry still alive. It's easy to look tough when you're marching in step with berserkers, I suppose. Not sure I'd like to fight side by side with an Uruk-hai berserker, to be honest. Any given moment he might turn around and just decide to cut you in half because he feels like it. But still, needs must. Umbar should be grateful that Isengard were able to weather the storm, I suppose. And maybe that's one thing you would say, is we've seen a little bit more, or a few more examples, I'd say, of the blue team working with one another than the red team. The main example of the red team doing so was Harad after they had already achieved a frontline victory over Umbar, and then naturally coming over to support their nearest ally. But we've seen a few more examples of these players working together. Umbar going over to help Imladris, Isengard siphoning off a bit of their frontline strength to try and assist Umbar. The one engagement that's been a bit of a microcosm, I suppose, is Lothlorien versus Arthedain, which is another example maybe of where the red team could have supported their ally a little bit more. The blue team didn't need to come to the aid of Lothlorien, really. They were always in the ascendancy there. You could not say the same for Arthedain, though. They were struggling a bit, and again, maybe 2 units of, well, rangers, we got 1 unit of high-end javelins, we got the steel bows, a trebuchet. That's a lot of money sunk into supporting units, which were ultimately a little bit underwhelming. If you're going to be aggressive in the way that Arthedain wanted to be, I think investing more onto your front line would have been the key. Something like the Fornosterine Knights would have suited that role against the elves. Woodland Protectors marching through their allies. Ones of Tir Gorthad receiving a little bit of support to try and bring down the Gwathi Myrdain now. And this is going to be the end. This more or less is clean up at this stage. The God Helene fleeing for the hills. Not often you rout Imladris off in their entirety, but that has happened, as well as Arthedain in the middle. So I think, with Angmar also largely gone but still fighting, it's going to be a case of who lasts longer, Harad or Angmar. I think Harad maybe have earned that honour more so. The only one of the red team armies to, well, the one to achieve the biggest single victory of all the red team. But Harad's problem perhaps is always longevity in melee. They have a lot in terms of damage dealing capabilities, but they couldn't go again, as it were, when it came to trying to do the same against even a portion of Isengard's army. They didn't have enough left in the tank, having already done so against Umbar. Difficult battles though, difficult matchups to be sure, and that is going to be that. Elements of Umbar still alive. What is there still alive? What is there still fighting on? It's not that much of anything. I mean, that fight over there in the distance has already come to its conclusion. And now we can see the process of padding out a kill count begins for the Walker Riders. Uruk-hai infantry, so they're returning, but that's a unit on the blue team's side. Beastmaster. Is he routing? He is. God Helium still routing in the distance. Haradrim Spearmen, Dunlanding Clansmen are pursuing. And again, filling their boots in terms of kills. Worthy victory this though for the blue team. There is a red star over here. Yep, one Gwaithir Myrdain. Still lives. Manages to charge up behind one of the pikemen and kill him. And get another one. Fitting that this is the one guy that's still fighting on behalf of his team. And that is going to be that. Victory for the Blues, and like I said, I think deserved. In the end, they responded to the situation a little bit better than the red team on this occasion, I do believe. Interesting to see Angmar in their natural habitat, as it were, in being very, very aggressive, not able to really see that through. Isengard do deserve an awful lot of credit, I will say. It looked a little bit suspect very early on when I was wondering if they would get themselves into position quickly enough. They did, and ultimately they ended up reaping the rewards for that, because not only did they effectively beat Angmar, but they were also able to use a part of their army at the very least to finish off Harad after they themselves had a good performance early on against Umbar. And yeah, I think the kill counts really do show what went on. It's not often that you can use kill counts, really. And you can also see that Lothlorien only narrowly got more kills than Arthedain, but Lothlorien very clearly were the ones that were in the ascendancy in that particular fight. But yeah, I think the right outcome here. Let's see what did the damage for Isengard, who you have to say with that level of kills should be the MVP of the match. Warg Riders, very well utilised, so Warg Riders and Skirmishers. And goes to show that this kind of cavalry unit can be very, very useful. The Warg Riders with that second hit point can last longer than single HP cavalry. Also, against the very limited ranged presence of Angmar, you can more freely utilise your cavalry. It was a little bit more difficult for the red team to use their cavalry, with both Isengard and Cardolan being crossbow-focused factions, and they could be very good at zoning out cavalry over a period of time in a battle anyway. Lurtz Hunting Pack doing decently, and I think that was mostly against the Harad breakthrough, actually. Good damage done. The Nazkai, we already commented on them being effective, as the Uruk-hai Berserkers were as well. Some really good performances, actually. Uruk-hai Pikemen vital on the front line. If you're going to try and hold back a full-blooded assault from Angmar, then you need something to anchor yourself in place, and the Uruk-hai Pikemen are one of the most reliable units in the game for doing such things. Only really the Dunlanding Clansmen lagging behind, but that's not terribly surprising. I mean, they are the worst infantry unit that Isengard have, stats-wise. So, yeah, it's been quite a while since this one was sent to me. I think it was actually sent to me in October of last year, so that does go to show how some replays do have a tendency to slip the net, but I did find it once more, and I did want to show it off because, again, this is going to be the last time that we see such a battle, I think, on this version of the game. And I do want to show pretty much everything I can that people send to me. So yeah, big thank you to KOS and to Fia for being a part of this battle, or making this battle replay happen and sending it to me and allowing me to show it. Better late than never. But yeah, I think coming up soon, I think there'll be 3 scenarios maybe. I think I'm going to be getting, I know I'm getting sent one by Horton. I don't think he ran it himself, but I think he made it and has sort of directed it, and I'm ultimately going to be getting that sent to me, pretty much the first big provider of many custom scenarios on this channel, so it's always nice when he chips back in with the odd battle or two. I also think the Womb Raider is making and running a couple of scenarios as well, which I hope to be able to show, and that will be on this version of the game as well. And any new patch stuff will happen as and when it does, really. So that's the sort of thing which we can also expect to see in the next month or so, I would suggest. But yeah, as with regard to other things, I don't know. I mean, there's still quite a lot of turbulence going on with me personally. It's not the sort of thing which is going to affect the channel really at all, I would hope. There are potential scenarios in which it does, but I think based on the fact that I'm recording so far ahead of time at this point, it shouldn't be too much of a concern. But yeah, it's the sort of thing which, if need be, a channel update may pop up all of a sudden, but like I said, with me recording a month and a half in advance, it's entirely possible that said channel update may have already come out and displaced something else in the schedule, so I don't know. It's the sort of thing which I'll keep people appraised of. Yeah, not been the easiest year and a half, I suppose. So yeah, hopefully better times ahead, but we'll see. But yeah, big thanks to all the players involved. Hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.